What happens next will bring tears to your eyes. Michael, a 78-year-old war veteran, had only one true companion left in his life, his German shepherd, Max. For the past 12 years, Max had been more than a pet. He was family. He was Michael's shadow protector and best friend. But today, everything was about to change. Michael lay weak on his hospital bed, staring at the empty corner where Max usually sat. His hands trembled as he reached out for a photograph on the nightstand. It was a picture of him and Max, taken 6 years ago at their favorite park. "I don't have much time left," he whispered to the nurse beside him. His final wish to see Max one last time. Doctors hesitated. Hospital rules didn't allow animals inside. But for a man who had dedicated his life to serving his country, wasn't there something they could do? As the nurse debated the rules, a miracle was already in motion. On the other side of town, Max sat at home, restless. His ears twitched. His heart pounded. He could feel it. Something was wrong. Then, as if guided by an unseen force, Max stood up. His body tensed. His instinct screamed at him. He had to get to Michael. Now, and what happens next, will leave you speechless. Max paced back and forth near the front door, his sharp ears twitching at every passing sound. Something deep inside him told him that Michael needed him. His body tensed, his tail stiffened, and his breath quickened. He let out a low whine, then another, louder this time. But no one was there to open the door. The house was empty. Michael's neighbors, who occasionally checked on Max, had no idea what was happening. The dog didn't understand human words, but he understood emotions. And right now, he felt something he'd never felt before. Panic. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Michael's condition worsened. His breaths became shallow. His fingers trembled as he clutched onto the blanket. The nurse by his side noticed the distress in his eyes. "Mr. Anderson, we're trying to find a way to bring Max here. Just hold on, okay?" But Michael only blinked slowly, his strength fading. He knew time was slipping away. Back at home, Max suddenly let out a deep bark, his instincts taking over. He ran toward the window, pressing his nose against the glass, looking outside. His heart raced. He couldn't wait any longer. Without hesitation, he leaped onto the couch, then onto the windowsill. His claws scratched against the wood as he struggled to push through. And then, he jumped. With a powerful leap, he crashed through the screen, landing hard on the ground outside. He shook himself off and sprinted toward the street. He didn't know exactly where he was going. He just knew he had to find Michael. The hospital was miles away, but Max had no intention of stopping. And what happens next will change everything. Max bolted down the street, his powerful legs pounding against the pavement. His ears were pinned back, his breath came in rapid bursts, and his eyes were locked on the road ahead. He didn't know exactly where Michael was, but something deep inside him, something instinctual, was pulling him in the right direction. It was as if he could feel Michael's presence, a bond so strong that not even distance could break it. Cars honked as he darted across intersections, narrowly avoiding danger. Pedestrians turned in shock as the large German shepherd weaved through the crowd, his determination visible in every movement. A woman gasped, "Whose dog is that? Where is he going?" A man tried to stop him, reaching out, but Max swerved past him without hesitation. Nothing could stop him now. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Michael's condition continued to deteriorate. His eyes fluttered open for brief moments before closing again. His breathing was ragged, uneven. The nurse, still by his side, held his hand gently. "We're trying to bring Max to you, Mr. Anderson. Just hold on a little longer." But Michael barely heard her. His thoughts were clouded, his body weak, yet, even in his fading consciousness, one thought remained clear. Max. He wanted to see his loyal companion one last time. Outside, Max's paws burned from the heat of the pavement, but he refused to slow down. His muscles ached, his tongue hung from his mouth, but the only thing that mattered was reaching Michael. He turned a corner and suddenly saw something ahead. A hospital. Was this the place? His instinct screamed, yes. With renewed energy, he pushed forward. He was almost there. But what happened next would change everything. Max skidded to a stop in front of the hospital entrance, his chest heaving as he caught his breath. His sharp eyes scanned the towering glass doors, but something was wrong. They wouldn't open. He stepped forward, nudging his nose against them, pawing at the smooth surface, but they remained shut. His heart pounded. Michael was inside. He could feel it. But how was he supposed to get to him? Inside the hospital, Michael's fingers twitched as his breathing became shallower. His weak eyes flickered open for just a moment, and with the last bit of energy he had, he whispered, "Max." The nurse beside him froze. She had been doing everything she could to comfort him, but nothing seemed to help. Then she heard it, the sound of barking. Outside, Max threw his head back and howled, a deep, desperate cry that echoed through the hospital parking lot. He barked again, pressing his paws against the glass, demanding to be let in. Patients and visitors turned their heads, startled by the sight of the powerful German shepherd standing at the doors. A security guard walked toward him, shaking his head. "Sorry, buddy, you can't be here," he muttered, reaching for his radio to call animal control. But before he could say another word, the nurse rushed to the entrance, her eyes wide with realization. "Wait," she shouted. "That's Max. That's Mr. Anderson's dog." The guard hesitated, but the nurse didn't. She ran toward the automatic doors, her fingers hovering over the emergency access button. She knew the hospital had rules, but she also knew something else. Michael didn't have much time left. And if Max was here, he was here for a reason. What happened next would leave the entire hospital in shock. The nurse hesitated for only a second before pressing the emergency access button. With a soft beep, the glass doors slid open, and in an instant, Max raced inside. The security guard stepped forward to stop him, but Max was too fast, dodging past him with laser focus. Gasps filled the waiting area as patients and visitors turned to watch the massive German shepherd charge through the hospital, his nails clicking against the polished floors. "Stop that dog," one of the staff members yelled, but no one could catch him. Max wasn't running wild. He had one goal, one mission. He had to find Michael. His nose twitched as he picked up the scent, his heart pounding. He turned a corner and suddenly came face to face with a row of hospital rooms. He paused, sniffing the air. One of these doors, one of them, was his destination. Meanwhile, in his bed, Michael's breath grew fainter. The nurse at his side gripped his hand, panic creeping into her chest. "Hold on, Mr. Anderson. Just hold on." But Michael's body was weak, his mind fading. Then a bark, faint at first but unmistakable. Then another, closer this time. The nurse turned toward the door, her breath catching. It couldn't be. Outside the room, Max let out a powerful bark, pawing at the door, his entire body trembling with urgency. He knew Michael was in there. He could feel it, but the door wouldn't open. He whimpered, scratched, barked louder. He was so close. Inside, Michael's eyes flickered. The familiar sound reached his ears, pulling him back from the edge of unconsciousness. His lips barely moved as he whispered the name he had been waiting to say. Max. And in the next moment, something happened that no one could have expected. The hospital room was silent except for the faint, uneven sound of Michael's breathing. The nurse's hands trembled as she watched him struggle to stay conscious. Then another bark. This time, it was louder, more desperate. Michael's eyelids fluttered, his fingers weakly twitching on the blanket. Max, he whispered again, barely audible. Outside the door, Max was frantic. His claws scraped against the wood, his deep barks echoing down the hall. He pressed his nose against the door, sniffing wildly. He knew Michael was right there. He let out a whimper, then a low growl of frustration. He needed to get inside. He had to. The security guard, now joined by another hospital staff member, approached quickly. "We have to get that dog out of here," one of them muttered. But before they could act, the nurse stepped between them, her voice firm. "Number, you don't understand. That's his dog. That's his last wish. Let him in." The guard hesitated, looking at the door, then back at the nurse. The hospital had strict rules, but right now, this wasn't just about rules. It was about something much bigger. The air in the room was thick with tension. Every second counted. Then, before anyone could react, a weak voice came from inside the room. "Let him in." The nurse turned sharply. Michael had spoken. His voice was frail, barely a whisper, but it was the first time he had spoken in minutes. His eyes, though heavy, were open, filled with something no one had seen in days. Hope. The security guard exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "This is against protocol." But then he sighed, stepping forward. He reached for the door handle, hesitated for just a second, then slowly pushed it open. Max didn't wait. The moment the door opened, he charged inside. And what happened next would bring the entire hospital to tears. The moment the door swung open, Max leaped forward, his nails skidding against the hospital floor as he rushed to Michael's bedside. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. The nurse gasped. The security guard, who had been ready to remove the dog just moments ago, stood frozen. Even the other hospital staff, peeking in from the hallway, stopped in their tracks. Max didn't hesitate. He jumped up, resting his front paws gently on the bed, his nose instantly pressing against Michael's frail hand. His tail wagged wildly, but there was something else, a deep whimper, a sound of pure emotion. He licked Michael's trembling fingers, nudging them as if to say, "I'm here. I found you." For the first time in hours, Michael's eyes fully opened. They were tired, heavy with exhaustion, but the moment he saw Max, something changed. A weak smile formed on his lips, and with all the strength he had left, he lifted his hand ever so slightly, letting his fingers brush against Max's fur. The room was silent. Everyone could feel it, the unbreakable bond between them. Tears welled up in the nurse's eyes. She had seen many goodbyes in this hospital, but none like this. Max let out another soft whimper, lowering his head onto Michael's chest, his big brown eyes full of love and understanding. He wasn't just a dog. He was family. He had come all this way because he knew. He knew his best friend needed him. Michael inhaled deeply, his chest rising and falling in a way that felt peaceful. He closed his eyes, his fingers still tangled in Max's fur. And at that moment, something shifted in the air. This wasn't just a visit. This was a goodbye. And what happened next? No one was prepared for. Max stayed perfectly still, his head resting on Michael's chest, listening to the steady but weakening rhythm of his heartbeat. The once sterile and emotionless hospital room was now filled with something indescribable. A moment of pure, silent love. The nurse wiped a tear from her cheek as she watched the way Michael's fingers barely held onto Max's fur, as if afraid to let go. Michael took a slow, deep breath, his frail body barely moving, his eyes opened just a little, his gaze locked onto Max's. No words were needed. Everything he wanted to say was in that look. Thank you for finding me. Thank you for loving me. I'll always be with you. Max let out a low whimper, pressing his body closer to Michael's side. He understood. He always had. The room remained silent except for the soft beeping of the monitors. The hospital staff, who had rushed to stop Max from entering, now stood frozen in the doorway, their hearts breaking at the sight before them. The security guard who had initially insisted on removing the dog now swallowed hard, his throat tightening with emotion. He had never believed in things like fate. But now, he wasn't so sure. Michael's breath grew lighter, shallower. The nurse stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder, her voice soft. "Mr. Anderson, we're here. Max is here." Michael's lips curled into the faintest smile. He had held on long enough. He had waited for this moment, and now he was at peace. Then, with one final soft exhale, Michael let go. The heart monitor let out a long, steady beep. The room stood still. Max didn't move. He just lay there, his warm body pressed against Michael's, as if trying to keep him here just a little longer. The nurse turned away, tears streaming down her face. She had seen death before, but never like this. Never this beautiful, never this heartbreaking. Max let out one last soft whimper, his ears drooping. He stayed beside his best friend, refusing to leave. And what happened next was something no one would ever forget. The hospital room was heavy with silence, a stillness that felt almost sacred. Michael was gone, but his presence lingered in the warmth of Max's body pressed against him. No one dared to move. No one dared to break the moment. It was as if time itself had stopped. Max didn't react right away. He stayed where he was, his chest rising and falling, his ears still slightly perked, as if waiting for his best friend to wake up. But when the monitor continued its steady, unbroken tone, something inside him changed. He lifted his head, his deep brown eyes scanning Michael's peaceful face, and then he let out a sound that no one in that room would ever forget. A howl, not just any howl. It wasn't loud, it wasn't aggressive. It was soft, trembling, filled with something so human-like that it sent chills down everyone's spine. It was a cry of loss, of understanding, of a pain so deep that words could never describe it. Tears fell freely down the nurse's face, and even the security guard, a man who had spent years enforcing rules without question, clenched his jaw as he wiped at his eyes. Max lowered his head again, pressing his nose against Michael's motionless hand. He gave it one last nudge, one last silent plea for his friend to come back, but he knew. He understood. The one person he had loved more than anything in the world was gone. The nurse took a shaky breath and stepped forward, reaching out to gently stroke Max's back. "He's at peace now, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice barely holding together. Max didn't pull away. He just closed his eyes, accepting the reality of the moment. And then something happened that no one expected. Max, the dog who had raced through the streets, broken through barriers, defied all odds to be here, did something no one could have predicted. He made a choice, and that choice would leave the entire world speechless. Max slowly lifted his head, his deep brown eyes filled with something beyond grief. Understanding. He nudged Michael's still hand one last time, then took a slow step back. The room remained silent, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone. The nurse wiped her eyes, watching carefully, sensing something profound was about to happen. Then, without hesitation, Max did something no one expected. He carefully climbed onto the hospital bed, curling up beside Michael's motionless body, pressing his head against his chest. His breathing slowed, his body stilled. He was not going to leave, not now, not ever. Tears streamed down the faces of the staff and visitors standing in the doorway. They had never seen love like this. Max had done the impossible to find Michael. He had raced against time, broken through barriers, and defied the odds, all for this moment. And now, he had made his final decision. If Michael was resting, then so would he. The security guard who had once tried to stop him now stood frozen, his eyes glistening. "That's loyalty," he whispered. For hours, Max didn't move. He stayed right there, curled against Michael, as if guarding him in his final moments. And then, something miraculous happened. The hospital director, who had been called in due to the breach of protocol, arrived to see what the commotion was about. But the moment she saw Max lying beside Michael, her professional stance crumbled. She looked at the nurse who wiped her tears and simply said, "We can't separate them." And so, they didn't. For the next 24 hours, Max stayed by Michael's side. Visitors, doctors, nurses, everyone who passed by the room stopped, watched, and cried. Someone took a picture, then another. The moment went viral. The world saw what true love and loyalty looked like. Days later, after Michael was laid to rest, Max was there, standing by his grave. He refused to leave. But then, something unexpected happened. A young soldier stepped forward. He had seen the viral story and had traveled miles just to find Max. He knelt, holding out his hand. "Michael would want you to be loved," he whispered. Max hesitated. Then slowly, he stepped forward. Michael's journey had ended, but Max's story was far from over. And that, my friends, is what true loyalty looks like.